Dad, we don't need lectures, we need results. That's what my oldest son, Brandon, said across a dinner table I built with my own hands. His brother, Tyler, smirked into his phone, half listening, half live streaming himself in my kitchen. It was Thanksgiving. The last one we'd all spend together. I remember the way Janine's hand tensed under the table, resting on mine. She knew, before I did, that our family was already beginning to split in two. They didn't say it outright. Not yet. But that night, I became the old man with too many opinions and not enough relevance. And in their eyes, education was just a relic I wore like a dusty coat. I taught literature at a small liberal arts college in upstate New York for 33 years. I never became rich, never bought a Tesla, never scaled anything. But I shaped minds. I sat with students who had no one else. I buried myself in books and ideas and dusty chalkboards, believing in a quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't flash, but lasts. Brandon never saw the point. He started flipping sneakers in college, then crypto, then tech-adjacent real estate. Every few months he was launching a new venture. Some succeeded. Most fizzled. But he always landed with that polished grin and phrases like, move fast and break things. Tyler, the younger one, built his name on lifestyle content. First gym reels. Then hard truths about masculinity. Then reaction videos. He called it influence. I called it audience manipulation. Neither of them ever said it to my face, but I could feel it growing, that simmering belief that I was obsolete. I spoke in pages. They spoke in metrics. The cracks showed slowly. Brandon began interrupting me during conversations. Tyler rolled his eyes when I asked about his content. They both stopped inviting me to their milestones, product launches, media appearances, influencer brunches. When I asked if Elise, Tyler's girlfriend at the time, wanted to come for Christmas, he replied. She says your place feels too tenured. Tenured. Like I was a chair gathering dust in the corner of some forgotten faculty lounge. At first, I tried harder. I watched Brandon's webinars. Subscribed to Tyler's channel. Even left a comment once. They never mentioned it. They didn't even like it. Janine told me to let go. She said time would humble them. I told her I didn't want them humbled, I wanted them to respect something before it was gone. One night, I called Tyler to tell him about an award I'd received, Lifetime Contribution to Education from the Northeast Faculty Society. His reply. That's cute, Dad. I think I just crossed 2 million on TikTok. So I stopped reaching out. Not out of anger. But out of self-preservation. Because sometimes the loudest disrespect doesn't come from shouting, it comes from silence where there used to be warmth. We didn't see them for nearly a year. Until everything broke. It started with the markets. Brandon had leveraged too much. Took on a massive expansion for a real estate tech app, something about gamified property shares. He thought the money would keep flowing. It didn't. Interest rates spiked. His partners bailed. His name ended up in a lawsuit, a minor one, but public. I found out through a student, not him. Tyler's fall was faster. One wrong podcast appearance. One poorly edited hot take about fatherhood that went viral, in the wrong way. He lost sponsors. Lost deals. Lost over 100K followers in a week. The backlash was so loud, even his silence trended. They didn't call me right away. Not even when everything was falling apart. But I knew they would. Because sooner or later, when the storm rises, people stop looking for followers. And start searching for lighthouses. It was a Tuesday. Rain tapping against the kitchen window, wind curling around the eaves of the house. I was halfway through reading East of Eden for the 5th time when my phone buzzed. Brandon, 2 missed calls. Tyler, 1 missed call. I stared at the screen like it had just come alive. A year of silence. 12 months where I'd become a footnote in their fast-moving lives. And now, they called. Not to wish me happy birthday. Not to invite me to brunch. But because the winds had shifted. Because they were sinking, and suddenly the man who once lectured too much looked like the only person who might understand how to tread water in a storm. I didn't answer. Not out of spite. But because I needed them to sit in that silence, the same silence I'd been forced to eat, day after day. They needed to taste it. The next morning, Tyler left a voice message. Hey, Dad. I know it's been a while. A lot's happened. I was wondering if we could talk. Just, talk. I miss you. Call me when you can. His voice cracked halfway through. I could tell he'd rehearsed it. Probably re-recorded 5 versions before leaving this one. I still didn't call back. Not yet. Brandon's approach was different. Hey, listen. Things have been a little rocky on my end. I know I haven't been the best son. But if you've got time this week, I'd love to stop by. I've got some business stuff I'd like your take on. Business stuff. Even in distress, he wrapped it in productivity. As if I was a consultant, not a father. I let that one ring too. 2 days later, Janine walked into the living room, drying her hands on a towel. You going to answer them eventually? I looked up from my book. Eventually. You're not doing this out of revenge, right? No, I said. I'm doing it for the same reason I used to assign silence in class. Sometimes people don't need an answer. They need time to hear their own questions. That Sunday, they both showed up. Unannounced. In the same car. That alone told me something had shifted. Brandon never shared rides. Tyler didn't wake up before noon. Yet there they were, standing outside my front door in the rain, 2 grown men who had once looked down on the roof over my head. Janine answered. She opened the door without a word. Looked them up and down. Then stepped aside and called over her shoulder. Ron. Your sons are here. I walked into the hallway slowly. Deliberately. Brandon looked thinner. His tie loose, shirt wrinkled. Tyler looked tired. The glow of online fame faded from his skin. I didn't offer hugs. Didn't scold. Didn't soften. Instead, I nodded toward the living room. Shoes off. Couch is clean. They obeyed like children. We sat in silence for nearly a minute. Then Brandon leaned forward, elbows on knees, and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. I messed up, Dad. He didn't look at me when he said it. Didn't elaborate either. Tyler spoke next. Same here. Different kind of mess, but just as bad. I folded my hands in my lap. Do you want to tell me what happened? Or are you just here to be forgiven? They flinched. Good. Brandon went first. The lawsuits. The investors walking out. The media twist that made it look like he'd scammed retirees. I didn't do anything illegal, he said quickly. But perception ruins everything. Tyler followed. The podcast. The clip. The angry duets on TikTok. The sponsors ghosting him. The way people he thought were friends vanished overnight. I can't even walk into a store without someone giving me that look. That look. The one they used to give me when I talked about books or education or the value of thinking deeply. The look of dismissal. Now it was their turn to wear it. Why now? I asked. Why come here? Brandon answered, voice barely above a whisper. Because I didn't know where else to go. Tyler nodded. And because. I think we forgot who you were. I got up. Walked into the kitchen. Started boiling water for tea. They followed me like shadows. I'm not going to fix this for you, I said plainly. That's not why I'm still here. Brandon frowned. Then why? Because I'm the man who taught you how to think. Even when you stopped listening. We sat with our tea in silence. No demands. No advice. Just three men in a room full of ghosts. Ghosts of birthdays skipped. Of dinners that turned into debates. Of a father's love, steady, boring, overlooked, waiting like a lighthouse no one noticed until the tide came in. That night, after they left, I sat on the porch and cried. Not from joy. Not from relief. But from the quiet ache of realizing that they didn't come back because they understood me. They came back because they had nowhere else to go. And part of me wished that wasn't enough. I used to believe the loudest moments in life were marked by shouting. By slamming doors, storming out, or delivering long, righteous speeches. But when you get older, and quieter, you realize power has a different sound. It sounds like not explaining yourself. That was the real turning point. It wasn't one moment, but a series of small, quiet decisions I made in the shadow of their return. The first came that evening, while Janine was setting the table for dinner. She always made too much food when they were around, as if feeding them would fix the distance. But I noticed something different in her eyes this time. Not hope. Not forgiveness. Resignation. Are you sure you want to keep them here? I asked gently. She looked at me and sighed. I want to believe they can change. And if they don't? Then they'll leave knowing this home didn't change. That stuck with me. After dinner, I returned to my study. The boys had drifted into the living room, heads bowed over their phones. I could hear them scrolling through comments and headlines about their respective falls from grace. They were still looking outward. Still waiting for someone else to repair the image. Not the person behind it. I turned on the old desk lamp, opened a fresh journal, and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. Let them rebuild on your terms, or not at all. The next morning, I started waking up an hour earlier. I brewed my coffee in silence, took my walk without leaving a note, and didn't ask if they wanted anything from the store. They noticed. Brandon asked if everything was all right. I smiled and said, better than ever. He didn't press. Tyler tried to strike up conversation about an article he read on emotional intelligence. I told him it was good reading. Nothing more. It wasn't punishment. It was detachment. The kind that says, you're welcome to exist here, but I won't carry you. I took a call from the college about the guest lecture series. They wanted me to headline a panel about generational ethics in the digital age. I accepted, not for pride, but because I finally felt ready to stand in front of young minds again without feeling like I had to prove I still mattered. That same day, I changed the Wi-Fi password. I didn't give them the new one. Not to be cruel, but to remind them the real connection they needed to rebuild wasn't online. They were irritated, at first. But irritation is the first crack in a brittle ego. By Friday, Brandon was reading a business ethics book from my shelf. Tyler stopped posting altogether. He spent most of his time in the garage, organizing old boxes like he was trying to piece together who he used to be. And me? I began smiling again. Not big, not loud. Just enough to feel like myself in my own house. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't waiting for their apology anymore. I was building something new without it. Subtle revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about giving them space to see exactly what they threw away, and making sure you're no longer the one who picks up the pieces for them. It was Saturday morning when I put that theory into motion. Brandon walked into the kitchen holding a sheet of paper. An old business proposal, something he scribbled down in a frenzy years ago and never bothered to revise. Now he looked at it like a stranger's handwriting. I think I can repurpose some of this, he said. Maybe scale it back, pitch it differently. I nodded. Who's your audience? I was thinking, early retirees, small investors. I raised an eyebrow. The same ones your last app lost money for. He didn't answer. You might want to reconsider your trust radius, I said gently. It's smaller now. And rightfully so. He didn't argue. Just folded the paper and said, "Can I show you a draft later?" "You can show it," I said. "But don't expect applause." That's what hurt him. Not mockery, but neutrality. Tyler, meanwhile, had taken over my back porch with a stack of notebooks and a second-hand camera. I caught him re-recording the same monologue over and over, struggling to sound sincere without a script. "Trying something new?" I asked. He looked up. "I thought I'd do a series on rebuilding after public failure. Honest, unfiltered." "Sounds risky," I said. "It is. Then it might be worth watching." I didn't offer to help. Didn't offer feedback. Just walked away and let the weight of his silence wrap around him like a blanket he had to sew himself. That evening, Brandon asked for a short-term loan, just until things stabilize. I told him I wasn't lending anymore. He asked why. I said, "Because bailing you out didn't make you better last time. It just made you louder." He didn't speak to me the rest of the day. Tyler made dinner instead. Chili, overcooked. But he did the dishes without being asked. Progress. The following week, I sent an anonymous donation to a struggling community college, in both of their names. Didn't tell them. Didn't need the credit. But the college president posted a thank you on LinkedIn. Brandon saw it. He came into my office with his phone, screen glowing. "You did this?" I shrugged. "Maybe someone thought your name needed to be on something meaningful for once." He didn't say anything. Just nodded, slowly, and walked out. Tyler, meanwhile, quietly started attending evening classes. Not at a flashy school, just local lectures on communication ethics and sociology. He came home with paperbacks and highlighters. No sponsorships. No cameras. I caught him once reading on the couch, his foot bouncing with focus. He looked up. "This, actually makes sense. The stuff you used to talk about." "I know," I said. "It always did. Subtle revenge is letting the world teach them what your words once tried to." The turning point wasn't when they apologized, they never really did, not in the way I once hoped. It came when they stopped expecting me to make things easier. When Brandon stopped talking about venture capital and started talking about community partnerships. When Tyler stopped asking for advice and started listening to it. I didn't need to sabotage them. Didn't need to post my version of the truth. Didn't need to make speeches about respect or love or family. I just stopped showing up to the performance, and let the stage lights dim. They figured out the rest. On the last day of their visit, I handed each of them a small envelope. Inside was a photo. Not of their childhood. Not of us smiling on some vacation. It was a snapshot I took from the porch, quietly, during one of their worst days, the two of them standing in the rain outside my front door, unsure if I would let them in. No words. Just the image. I wanted them to remember what it looked like when pride collapsed. When they learned that the man they had mocked was the only one who kept the door unlocked. Tyler folded the picture slowly. Brandon said, "You always had a way of getting through without raising your voice." I looked at them both. "Now let's see if you can do the same." The house was quiet after they left. Not the kind of silence that follows an argument. It was denser than that. A reflective stillness, the sound of two grown men walking away with their illusions cracked and their pride left behind. I didn't expect much to change after that visit. But within weeks, the ripples began to show. Brandon had posted a video, simple, unedited, talking about what went wrong with his company. Not blaming investors. Not defending his image. Just the facts. Honest, even uncomfortable ones. It didn't go viral. It didn't trend. But the comments section was different this time. No clapping hands. No fire emojis. Just quiet gratitude. I wish more founders would talk like this. My dad used to say the same thing. I never listened either. This hit harder than I expected. It was the first post of his that didn't sell anything. And the first time I saw myself in his words. Tyler launched a new channel, though he didn't promote it on his old accounts. Just a low-key handle with no filters, no brand deals. He spoke plainly into the camera from his apartment, reading short essays and exploring topics like integrity and consequence. His subscriber count didn't skyrocket. But he stayed consistent. He even quoted one of my lectures once, word for word, without naming me. I knew the phrasing. I recognized the rhythm. It was a small nod. But it meant everything. Still, consequences aren't only about public redemption. Some came quieter. Sharper. Brandon emailed me late one night. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just a line of text. I had to sell the condo. I read it twice before replying. Then you finally made room to build something real. He didn't write back. Tyler called a week later. Said he'd been dropped by another sponsorship he forgot he'd signed, a long-term deal they'd retracted citing moral clarity issues. I signed it without reading the clause, he said. Because I thought I'd always be marketable. What did you learn? That the market doesn't care about your story. Just your moment. Then stop chasing moments, I said. He paused. That's what I'm trying to do. But it's hard. I never said it would be easy. I know. You just made it look easy. That stayed with me. They were beginning to understand that collapse is often the best editor. That when your name becomes noise, your silence becomes power. Brandon started tutoring finance students at the community college, pro bono. A student of mine recognized him, sent me a photo of the two of them in a dingy classroom, Brandon pointing at a whiteboard with actual enthusiasm. He didn't know the photo had been taken. That made it better. Tyler began attending local discussion groups. In person. No cameras. Just people wrestling with real ideas, no agenda, no brand building. One of the facilitators reached out to me anonymously and said, "You raised a son who's learning how to listen again." That's rare. I didn't respond. Some consequences you just fold into your heart and let them settle quietly, like dust finally landing. Janine asked me one evening, "Do you feel avenged?" I thought about it. About every missed birthday. Every eye roll. Every time I was called outdated, irrelevant, redundant. No, I said. I feel seen. She smiled. That's better. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with applause. It arrives as growth. As quiet character. As the realization that you were right, not because you won, but because you endured. They planted storms. I planted patience. And we all got exactly what we sowed. It was early spring when they returned. No fanfare. No announcements. Just a quiet knock at the front door on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when time slows and memory sharpens. Janine answered. This time, she didn't smile right away. She looked them over, their postures humbler, their clothes simpler. She stepped aside only after they both met her gaze without flinching. I was in the study, reading. I heard the door close and the footsteps draw closer. Then a soft knock, not on the front door, but on the frame of my own. "Dad?" Brandon's voice. I didn't respond immediately. I finished the sentence I was reading, placed a bookmark carefully, and looked up. They stood there, not as sons expecting anything, but as men uncertain of how to rebuild something they'd once burned. "Can we talk?" Tyler asked. I nodded. Kitchen. They followed. No small talk. No phones in sight. We sat at the table like we had when they were teenagers, except this time, I wasn't the one who had to explain anything. Brandon cleared his throat. I want to apologize. For what, exactly? I asked. For thinking you were small because you chose a quiet life. For acting like your choices didn't matter because they didn't make headlines. For using you, as a backboard for my own arrogance. He paused. I let the silence stretch. Then Tyler spoke. And I'm sorry for twisting everything you said into something I could mock online. For letting strangers' praise drown out your patience. For making your house a last resort instead of a first home. I didn't smile. I didn't tear up. I studied their faces. Regret lived there, not the performative kind, but the kind that grows behind the eyes when you've spent time in the ruins of your own making. I accept your words, I said. But words are not the debt. Behavior is. They nodded. I stood and retrieved 2 folders from the cabinet beside the fridge. Inside each was a contract. Nothing legal. Just written expectations, plain and firm. One was a weekly accountability journal. The other was a commitment to serve, 100 volunteer hours each, to be completed without fanfare or documentation. They opened them, read, and didn't speak. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about weight. If you want to rebuild what we lost, it has to be carried. Not claimed. Brandon looked up. What if we fail? You won't, I said. Because now, you know who's watching. Tyler exhaled. Thank you, for not shutting the door forever. I didn't keep it open for you, I said quietly. I kept it open for the men I hoped you'd become. There was no dramatic music. No hugging montage. Just 3 cups of coffee cooling on a kitchen table, and a long overdue agreement sealed with eye contact. Afterward, we sat outside. Brandon helped me clean the gutters without being asked. Tyler trimmed hedges with focus I hadn't seen in him since he was 15. At one point, Tyler turned to me and said, "It's strange, how peace can feel like punishment when you're not used to it." I laughed. That's because real peace isn't comfortable. It's honest. That night, they left again, but this time with no tension hanging in the air. Only effort. Only intention. Janine sat beside me on the porch, watching the car disappear down the road. You think they'll follow through? I nodded. Because they have to. No, I said. Because they want to. And that was the confrontation they never saw coming. No screaming. No ultimatums. Just clarity. And finally, consequences shaped into character. There's something strange about quiet after a storm. At first, it unnerves you. You brace for the next strike, the next wave, the next demand. But when it never comes, you start to feel something else entirely. You start to feel yourself again. After the boys left that last time, the house returned to its familiar rhythm. Not empty, just whole in its stillness. Janine went back to her gardening. She'd hum as she watered the hydrangeas, her sleeves rolled up and sunlight threading through her hair. She didn't speak about the boys much, but I could tell, some small ache had finally started to soften. As for me, I took up my old routine with new resolve. Morning walks. Reading by the window. Journaling not out of pain, but presence. I even accepted a semester-long return to the university. The lecture hall smelled like old books and ambition, and the students, bright-eyed and quietly skeptical, reminded me why I never stopped believing in the slow burn of truth. After class, a few would linger. They asked about influence. About failure. About what to do when your own family doubts your worth. I never gave them polished answers. I told them what I lived, that peace isn't what you feel when everyone claps for you, it's what you feel when you no longer need the applause. Brandon called once a week. Never to ask for anything, just to share. Updates. Insights. Failures. Sometimes, he asked questions like a student. And I answered like a father. Tyler began sending essays. Rough drafts at first. Then published pieces. One was picked up by a mid-size magazine. Another became a podcast episode, nothing viral, nothing massive, but quietly impactful. He wrote about regret. About noise. About how silence became his mirror. He never named me. But in every paragraph, I felt seen. One morning, I found a small package on my porch. Inside was a book. My book. A first edition, one of only 10 printed, the one I thought had vanished years ago. Tucked inside was a note in Brandon's handwriting. Found this in a resale shop. Thought it belonged back where it was first believed in. No signature. Just that. I placed it on my desk, right next to the framed photo of our backyard, not the boys in the rain this time, but the morning after, when the sun hit the pavement, and everything shimmered. The past hadn't disappeared. But it had softened. And in its place, something sturdier had grown. Not the version of family I once imagined, but one that had been tested. Bent. Cracked. And quietly reforged. There was peace now. Not because they came back. But because I no longer needed them to. There's a moment every morning, just before the sun clears the hill behind our house, when the world feels suspended in amber. No movement. No sound. Just that golden hush stretching over the porch like a soft blanket. I've started rising before it happens. Not because I have to, I'm well past that phase of life. But because I want to greet the quiet like an old friend. There was a time I'd wake up and check my phone before even brushing my teeth, looking for updates from the boys, worried about how they were doing, if they needed help, if they remembered to eat, to sleep, to breathe between the chaos they called success. Now. I water the front hedge. I refill the bird feeder. And I write, not about loss anymore, but about rediscovery. One of my old colleagues from the university emailed last week. He said, "Your name's making its way back into faculty lounges. Students are quoting you again, not from textbooks, but from your recent lectures. They say you're easier to understand now." I smiled reading that. Maybe because I've stopped trying to sound important. There's a power in simplicity I wish I'd learned sooner. Janine has taken up painting again. She set up a small studio in the sunroom. Not to sell, not to impress anyone, just for herself. Sometimes she paints flowers. Sometimes, faces. Once, I saw her working on a canvas that looked suspiciously like the maple tree in our backyard, the one we planted with Brandon when he was 9. She didn't say anything when she noticed me watching. Just smiled and kept painting. Some wounds heal in silence. Others bloom. Brandon's been sending updates on his community project, a local mentorship program for young entrepreneurs who don't come from money or connections. He doesn't call it charity. He calls it corrective guidance. I can see pieces of me in the structure he's building, measured, grounded, intentional. And Tyler? He wrote a piece for a well-known digital journal, raw, unfiltered, and painfully honest. He wrote about unlearning the noise, about finding identity outside of an audience. He sent me the link. No subject line. No message. Just the link. I clicked it. Read every word. Sat with it for an hour. Then I replied with 2 sentences. You found your voice. I'm proud of the man using it. No emoji. No signature. Just enough. That night, he called. Didn't say much. Just. Thanks, Dad. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence after. I let it sit. Let it breathe. Let it mean something. Some days, the porch feels like a cathedral. I sit with my coffee, the wood beneath me worn smooth by years of early mornings and hard-earned stillness, and I listen. Not for the doorbell, not for footsteps. I listen for the simple, sacred sound of a life finally lived on my own terms. That is where I found healing. Not in their apologies, though they came. Not in their changes, though they were real. But in the stillness of knowing I never stopped being the man I always claimed to be. It's strange, you spend so much time teaching others how to live with integrity that you forget how rare it is to hold on to your own when no one's looking. That was my test. Not to save them, but to stand still while they spiraled, and trust that the values I planted would eventually take root. And they did. Not loudly. Not all at once. But like ivy along a wall, steady, climbing, inevitable. Brandon now writes reflections at the end of each quarter, not business updates, but personal earnings. He sends them out to his network, no PR firm involved. Just thoughts. Honest ones. Sometimes I reply. Sometimes I don't. He never expects it either way. That's growth. Tyler sends me podcasts now, not his, but ones he listens to. Topics he wants to discuss. He started coming to my lectures once a month, sitting quietly in the back. He never interrupts. Just takes notes. Sometimes lingers after. Sometimes just nods and leaves. But I see him. I see both of them. And more importantly, they see themselves. That was always the hope. Not that they'd return to me, but that they'd return to who they were before the noise. It's taken years, and even now, I wouldn't call us recovered. We are simply rebuilding. And that, in its own way, is sacred. The last letter I received from Brandon was handwritten. He'd attached a photo, not of himself, but of a young man he was mentoring. The caption on the back said, "Thank you for showing me how to teach through stillness." I keep that letter in my top drawer, right next to my father's watch. Both reminders of time. Of legacy. Of how often we teach by enduring, not explaining. I don't need validation anymore. Not from the world. Not even from them. Because I've lived long enough to learn that real peace doesn't come when they return. It comes when you finally stop chasing what they never had the tools to give you. And as the sun crests that hill again, spilling gold across the lawn, I close my eyes. And breathe. I didn't win them back by fighting louder. I became the kind of silence they could finally hear.